I welcome all of you who are already online. I'm sure that a few will still join during the next minutes, and I hope, that you are all well. Hopefully, in these crazy times, that's the most important thing. And I welcome you all to this fourth webinar of this series. It's on the third sub-theme of the World Congress on Conservation Agriculture. We call this series The Road to the 8th World Congress of Conservation Agriculture. And I think this is a good opportunity to introduce our speakers, keynote speakers already, to introduce the sub-themes that will be discussed and present at the World Congress next year. And I also want to welcome the panelists in this session, and above all, our main speaker today, which is Tom Goddard. I also welcome the colleagues from FAO, who jointly with ECAF are organizing this 8th World Congress. And saying this, I will pass right away the word to my colleague Fenton Beat from FAO, who will introduce both the webinar series we are going to hear today, and also the keynote speaker, Tom Goddard. Please, Fenton, have your say.
Thank you, Gottlieb, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues, and thank you for taking the time to join us. So the very first webinar in this series was presented by Professor Gottlieb Basch, who is the president of the European Conservation Agriculture Federation, ECAF, and will serve as our moderator today, so thanks again. And for today's event, I'm pleased to announce that the keynote presentation will be from Tom Goddard, and he will highlight advocacy and political support that's needed for conservation agriculture. Who am I? My name is Fenton Bede, and I'm the team leader for rural, urban, cropping and mechanization systems. And we are part of the division of plant production and protection here in FAO. The team promotes sustainable crop production optimized through technologies and agribusinesses that enable farmers to produce more while conserving the natural resource base and minimizing pesticides and fertilizers. Focus is on diverse cropping systems in rural and urban areas, and including mechanization services and the likes of protected cultivation. Recently, we've had approved the Sustainable Dryland Agriculture Program by COAG and the member countries to FAO, which provides a clear focus for the adoption of sustainable crop production practices in the world's drylands. I think we all know, but just as a reminder, sustainability in terms of crop production is defined in three ways. 1, income generation. 2, environmental protection. 3, social equity and creation of decent jobs. I think the reason we're all here is that we realize agronomic practices are essential to achieve sustainable crop production, and this includes conservation agriculture. As we all know, this is based on 3 key principles: minimum soil disturbance, preferably no-till or minimized tillage; 2, permanent soil cover by mulch or cover crops; and 3, diversification of crops and their associations, rotations. And for further information on FAO's position on conservation agriculture, please visit the designated webpage. Also, the team under the leadership of Joseph Kiensley develops technical support on appropriate mechanization for the likes of conservation agriculture. And again, please refer to FAO's website on sustainable mechanization. So where are we globally in terms of conservation agriculture? It's adopted on over 180 million hectares, which equates with 12.5% of annual cropland. Most of the farmers that benefit from conservation agriculture are small-scale farmers, with 50% of the area under conservation agriculture in low and middle income countries. And this includes 78 countries of the world. FAO and partners provides technical support on the adoption and promotion of conservation agriculture principles and practices to our member countries. In this regard, FAO has established strong partnerships with the likes of CGIAR centers such as CIMIT, ICADA, and more recently IITA, and also partners such as the African Conservation Tillage Network, Conservation Tillage Research Center in China, of course, ECAF, and financial institutions including the World Bank, IFAD, and of course, a number of NGOs. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank ECAF for the close collaboration with FAO on raising awareness and promoting conservation agriculture, including this co-organizing series of the webinars. Scott Leb mentioned this is our fourth, to increase awareness of conservation agriculture in preparation for the 8th Congress on Conservation Agriculture, which will be held in June in Switzerland next year. In addition to these webinars, FAO and ECAF are also carrying out regional technical consultations, and these take the form of roundtable discussions with lead experts in different regions, including Eurasia, Middle East, South Asia, Africa, Central and South America. And the purpose of these roundtables is to update the global status of conservation agriculture. Okay, moving on to this event, Gottlieb is our expert moderator, and you will see at the bottom, there's the questions and answers box. Please enter any questions, any requests for further information, anything you would like to discuss. So following the keynote presentation, we would like to have a discussion which harnesses and allows us to further discuss some of the things that are presented. Now, in terms of the keynote presentation, it's my pleasure to introduce Tom Goddard, who was a senior policy advisor with the Agriculture and Forestry Ministry in Alberta, Canada. Tom has consulted internationally on soils, conservation, evaluations, and critically policy development. Tom's background is in extension, soil science, and field work across a range of agriculture, industry, and governmental environments. Tom is able to translate across disciplines, industries, and provide pragmatic solutions to current and strategic issues. Technically, his research has been focused on landscapes and scales beyond test tubes and small plots, using technology models and expert knowledge. Tom has combined his writing, foresight, technical and policy experience to help governments and industry to develop and grow conservation agriculture at scales. The title of the presentation is Mainstreaming of Conservation Agriculture with National Policy and Institutional Support, and for global governance to support national and international needs and commitments. So it's my pleasure to hand over to you, Tom.
Thanks so much, Fenton. I'll see if I can handle the technology and share my screen here with you.
I guess you are the host already. I think it's starting, right? Perfect.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah, just put the presentation mode.
Yeah. There we go.
Remember that only the panelists are connected with video. All others are only connected remotely, not even by voice. So we ask you all, any question you have, don't use the chat box, but please the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. Thank you. Please, Tom, go ahead.
Thank you, Gottlieb. I assume everybody can see my screen now, and yes. I will start off with the presentation. As Fenton said, I read off the title here. It's a long title, but basically we can think of this as mainstreaming of CA in policy and institutional context across all scales from local to global. I'd just like to acknowledge my co-author here, Glynis Fry, Executive Advisor with the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry. She and I have worked together for a while now, and even after my change in careers this year, we still have a few projects that we're working together on, and I value her contributions. So my presentation is not going to give you the answers maybe that some people are looking for, but present sort of the issues and the problems. You have to come to the Congress, I think, for the answers and the full discussion. So I'm going to deal with 4 parts here. One is look at the sort of the past policies that have influenced the adoption of CA. I want to bring in the issue of private policy and the private players or actors in this arena. some of the large international conventions that we have, and then end up with a few slides on sort of the current macro trends that we have. And I guess we need to say something about the COVID disruption that we're all going through now. So first of all, the review of the past policies and or things, and I just want to bring this up in terms of a cost-benefit analysis framework approach, which is what farmers often look at. When we're doing research, we often look at individual components of the CA system. You might be looking at yields, you might be looking at organic matter or biodiversity or energy consumption. But it's up to the farmer to take all of those costs and the benefits and put them all together in some kind of analytical framework. So we have to keep that in mind. The farmer looks at things maybe a little differently as a scientist, and we've seen this recently in the academic literature. People are getting all worried about yields. Are the yields more or less or different under no-till versus conventional things, whereas the farmer's looking at it from, if the yield is the same and if I'm using 20% less inputs, my profitability is much better. Also, the issues of yield variance. I've looked at some data, a number of years ago and found that yield variance under CA systems was far less. So that affects the risk of the farmers, and that's something that farmers can take to their bankers, and it means something to them. So we need to be thinking also in the terms of the farmers and the analytics side of things. When I looked through all the literature of adoption and disadoption, I come up with sort of 4 factors in here that are reoccurring in all of them. One is the mindset, and CA practitioners have known that we have to get over that bias, over that mindset block, develop knowledge and understanding, and this is both in the farmers, the governments, the researchers themselves, and the private sector. So all actors apply this. Same thing with capacity, the capacity of institutions, whether it be farmers, extension agencies, research, governments. It's the capacity of them to take on new thoughts, to be resilient, to be dynamic, to adjust to new information. We live in this information explosion age of more and more information coming to us. How do we sift through that and synthesize through that? Access to appropriate equipment. Equipment's being a big problem in developing CA systems. So we need to understand how to do that, as well as the inputs and the output markets. How do we get seeds? We are looking at more diverse cropping systems. So these new crops, where are the markets for them, and as well finance. Land tenure has come out as well, or maybe I should say tenure of natural resources. In some cases, it's access to water. But if you're renting short-term land leases, we have to keep in mind that CA is a long-term venture for the farmers. So we need to keep in mind these dimensions, I guess, to CA systems, which may be unique or need change from conventional agriculture. I look at some of the policies around the world that have been applied for CA systems. This one is something that we had done with FAO a number of years ago in different regions, and looked at the policies that were in play. I'm not going to go through all of the left-hand column here, but pay attention to the 2 arrows. When you look across the rows on this, cooperative research and the national government support are 2 key policy tools for implementation of CA across the board. Often when you get those 2 together, it will spin off other policies, such as taxation stimulus programs, specific agencies, and perhaps foreign aid type programs. So it's not one type of policy, it's usually this mixture, milieu of them. Couple of local successes. I'm not going to go in detail a lot of them, but machinery, as I said, had been a big issue in there. It's either unavailable or inappropriate for conditions, or it's expensive. So it's been a barrier of entry into CA system. One of the great ways of getting around this is using the service provider network. These are consultants that have the small seeders or large seeders, whatever the case is. So they have the latest equipment. They know how to run it, how to calibrate it. They assume the risk of purchasing and operating that equipment. They can also provide information or ability to access inputs and also do proper timing, perhaps for the farmers. Bangladesh, India are a couple of areas where early on these service providers took off. India with their happy seeders made happy farmers and happy service providers. In East Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, Zimbabwe all have systems in place now where that's happening. And as well in the other countries, Europe, Argentina, USA, Canada, all have this where farmers can get access to sort of the latest technology. They're confident that the operator is doing a good job. CA knowledge is the other one, this mindset barrier that goes across everybody. So it's that learning, sharing, capacity building function, whether you're at the farm groups, governments, research scientists, that all has to happen. The farmer organizations being key in this, and in terms of building from the bottom up policies and the ground level operations. So they do the outreach, the local delivery. And when they become very organized, they end up being advisory bodies to governments, to the private sector in terms of adopting CA, what the priority issues are for research, things like that. In Africa, Zimbabwe has an official body that advises on that. Same thing in Zambia. There's the Zambia Farmers Union, and a spin-off of that is the Center or Conservation Farming Unit, I should say, that provides that advisory role. The KwaZulu-Natal Farmers Organization for the larger farmers in South Africa are also very active and advising the government on policy needs. Same thing happens in South America, North America, and we see these national groups aggregating up into regional ones. The European CA Federation is one example of that. We also have them in the Americas and globally with the global CA network as well. So that has been very helpful. This brings me into the issues of the different policy types that we have out there, or topology of policies. We have to realize it's not just one policy. If you have just an incentive for machinery, it's not going to work. If you have just a little bit of research going on agronomy, it's not going to work. You need these policies in there. We have to look also at the bigger world of policies and not just agriculture policies. This is a graphic from a Sustainable Prosperity Institute that is developed materials sort of promoting the new clean innovation systems that many countries need. And governments have to play a leading role in this, but they have to also look at the different types of policies. So we can have the push policies, which are things like funding research agencies, investing in research. We can have the pull policies, which might be signals from markets. It might be overcoming barriers in markets. It might be things like carbon pricing. We have the grow policies that are things like the financing. How do we facilitate things into marketable products? So again, loans for farmers, capital investments, that sort of thing. And then the strengthening policies, which are the enablers and think tanks and conferences like the World Congress. There's a lot of strengthening that happens in building networks and that, as well as data systems are strengthening type of policy, developing that. So these type of things happen. We have across the bottom that continuum from research to development to diffusion of products, and the private investors and the private functions along this too. So again, it's not just public policy, it's private policy at play throughout this mixture of policy development. So that brings me to the private players here. And this is a simple graphic showing that we have both public policy and private policy at play. If you are government, it's dominantly public policy, but there is some private policy there. If you're an industry mogul on the other side, it's dominantly private policy, but there is public policy at play. Just want to point out the differences in how those policies are developed. The public policy development is a long, sort of arduous process, very structured. Everybody has to be included. It's large governance, usually large areas. It happens slowly. Government has lots of resources. Sometimes they don't worry about deadlines. On the other side, the private policy is usually short, informal or targeted consultations. They don't mind taking risks. That's part of their genetics. They like experimenting, like pushing the envelope. There's usually collaborative willingness to collaborate, I should say, in the pre-competitive space. They have short timelines. Timelines have to be met, and often don't have limited resources. So again, quite a contrast in how these policies are being developed. CA can go into the middle and play both sides here, and have a role to influence both sides if we want CA to be truly mainstreamed and adopted large scale. The other areas that the private sector are definitely involved in, and farmers and CA practitioners need to be perhaps more involved in, is some of these larger amalgamations of the private sector, and one being the roundtables, which are now a decade to 2 decades old, I guess. When I look at all of the roundtables and the principles that they highlight, it comes down to the 4 principles I have here at the bottom, and that's transparency of the process, honoring the laws at play in the country, as well as the labor laws, and recognizing not to damage or impair the environment, and to have good agricultural practices. So again, CA is a natural fit, especially in these last 2, and I think can contribute to the earlier 3 components as well. So there's the opportunity there, as well as the roundtables. We have these other organizations at an international scale. There's lots of wildlife organizations now that are at play, as well as environmental advocacy groups. And again, CA has something to contribute to that. There's the Business and Biodiversity Offset Program that have come into play here with a biodiversity focus. The World Economic Forum is another meeting that happens every year. This year it met early on, and they had this year come up with a performance indicators for the environmental, social, governance performance of companies. They said that we can't wait for government. We need to start developing something. So they have a 3P process of principles, people, planet, and prosperity. Priorities with 22 measures. Well, planet is about the well-being of the planet. Prosperity in terms of sustainable business production. So again, CA aligns with something like this, and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development also have metrics out there. So we're entering this era of a lot of metrics and measures and things like that. I find that CA practitioners are already into that space. We've already been observing, measuring, evaluating CA systems, and we have lots to contribute. Keep in mind the business and the roundtables, the impetus for that, or driver for that, is coming from the consumers through these large corporations that we see. And again, even though we might be dealing with one area of companies, we need to sort of follow that genetics up to the parent companies and larger companies and realize that they're all influencing, talking to each other. So again, you don't have to talk to the whole crowd. You can talk to a couple members and have influence over the larger bodies. A lot of these certification systems and things have all of these players together endorsing it. So they want to watch and learn from this. So again, what can we teach them? I think this is a simple graphic from David Pennell, an Australian economist, looking at the public-private benefits. And this is something to keep in mind when we're talking to farmers, when we're talking with the industry or environmentalists or whatever, that these 2 axes, it's positive to the right and upper and negative to the lower. The farmers have a private net benefits. When they're producing a commodity, they gain revenue. They want to be over on the right-hand side of this graphic. If we are an environmental advocacy group, we're interested in the public benefits, ecosystem services, that sort of thing, maybe water quality. So we want to go on the upper axis as much as possible. I'll just throw a couple of examples in here. to illustrate this thinking. If we look at the Green Revolution, it was all about the private net benefits. Let's maximize production, maximum yields, use whatever inputs we need. They didn't really worry about public net benefits, and it wasn't on the radar at the time. And so sometimes there was damage to the environment with over fertilization or something like that, tillage. Then along came CA, and we moved from the lower right quadrant to the upper right quadrant, still interested in private net benefits, maximizing profit for the farms, but also generating these public net benefits at the same time. Might mention the public net benefits that we're not necessarily getting paid for, but they are there, and we can quantify them. Again, the environmentalists, they are focusing at the top of the environmental axis, and sometimes they're not aware if they're on the right side or the left side of that arrow, whether they're generating positive or negative private net benefits, which is, again, why CA needs to be in there to help them to make sure that everything is on the right side of that graphic. International conventions now. We'll go very large here briefly. One of the big ones in the room is the climate change, the IPCC people. Some of the issues with it are unique characteristics is all countries are engaged in this, and it's a high frequency meetings. They're meeting every year, sometimes a couple times a year. They've done a lot of great things with assessment science of handling these large sort of fuzzy type of concepts, dealing with uncertainty, using predictive models quite well, and mixtures, gathering scientists together, a lot of interesting stuff coming out of that. The climate smart agriculture is born out of the IPCC type initiatives, which is basically equivalent to CA. The Paris Accord recognized or put a stake in the sand in terms of carbon, recognizing carbon storage potentials. The 4 per thousand initiative came out of that. They've developed rule books. They've pointed and pushed for the urgency of changes that are needed, what practices are needed, that sort of thing. On the downside, it is a very slow process because of everybody involved on that, but positively, I guess it does remain the only multilateral forum around. So it's the only annual meeting of all the countries in the world. So something to be aware of. Again, if we can get CA knowledge into one country, they could be at the table meeting with a couple of other countries and diffuse that knowledge to the larger group. A colleague that was involved with some of these IPCC meetings like early years, decades ago, said one of the most rewarding experiences for him was giving general information talks on soil organic matter to the crowds. People just weren't aware. They needed the education, came seeking knowledge. So again, we need to be engaged. Other international conventions that are opportunities for CA are the Convention for Biologic Diversity. Right now they're going through a 10-year or developing a new 10-year strategy. It was supposed to be out this year, but because of the pandemic, I think it's being delayed till early next year. They've realized that they need to progress beyond these protected areas. You can't put a fence around and create parks everywhere. They've done that, so now what? Now they realize that they need agriculture to enable them to achieve their biological targets or biodiversity targets. They have a tool that they're talking about now called Other Effective Area-Based Conservation Measures, nice long name, which basically, opens the door that they recognize that CA might be providing conservation measures, and maybe they should be looked at. Another convention, the Convention to Combat Desertification. Again, CA is climate smart agriculture. It plays a role in there for reducing erosion, for providing sustainable agriculture. United Nations Environment Program is an influencer. They're involved in a lot of these committees and convention groups around the world. Another one that is emerging in the business sector that is now moving into the agriculture sector is the circular economy. Again, something worth watching, and I think is positively aligned with CA. The biggie in the room is Sustainable Development Goals. We moved from the Millennium assessment of 10 priorities to the SDGs now being 17. And it's almost like an exponential expansion here of each of these 17 will expand to a total of 169 targets, and they have, I think, 230 indicators last I counted. But it is big. It is United Nations initiative. The business are supporting it. They're behind it. They're already moving on some of these targets or goals. And CA also can align with many of these at either the goal level or the target level quite handily. And again, it's up to CA, the CA community, to document this, to bring this forth. Don't wait for SDGs to come to us. We need to go to them. The benefit of SDGs is because they're global. They're very large, encompassing terms, so we can easily fit CA into them and support and strengthen them. So some of the conventional issues or issues with the conventions that are out there, some of them are issue focused, such as climate, and have sort of that focused tunnel vision that comes with it, which isn't so bad. Others are broadly focused, like SDGs, and they have these broad statements and can't really get down into the details in that and retain the broad global focus at the same time. It does bring an opportunity for countries around the world to say, yes, we support this, and this is supported by our country with these policies. Or likewise, it can also be compliance policies. It can say, because of this, we are going to put compliance policies in our country of such and such. So something that it could be a plus or minus for us. And which do we want to do? CA has to move into that space. So this could be restrictive or it could be enabling, depending on which way we look at it. And there's lots of other ideas in history in that I won't get into. A lot of these conventions are slow and methodical, inclusive. Remember, it's government, it's public policy that's being developed, so it has those traits and the characteristics. So we have to understand and deal with that. Is agriculture on the radar of these conventions? Maybe it is in word only, but do they have that knowledge and understanding of it? Are there farmer groups involved in this, or is it just sort of the academic researchers? Is there a mixture? Is there sort of that round table equivalent of all players represented equally there? Nevertheless, these conventions provide signals for governments around the world, or regional points of influence in the world. It says what these issues are, labels a direction that they need, that we need to go, and sort of pointing people in the right direction. It's also something that the public watch and are aware of. It's in the newspapers, it's on the television, things like that. So it is educating the public. Again, something we need to be aware of. So let's go into the current trends here. Couple slides. One is the macro drivers. So these are the macro trends in the world. There's about 7 of them here. And of course, there's lots more. The big issue with all of these things is how do we crunch it down to what we think is the essence, or the few main drivers. Increasing global temperatures is one there with the climate change. Look at currently around the world what's happening with hurricanes or typhoons or droughts, that sort of thing. It's there. We also have increasing global population. The global population is not curving off. And it's an increasingly urbanized population. So the rural population is not increasing near so much as the urban population. Everybody's moving to the cities. We have these mega cities now. I think the largest city is over 30 million people in one city. So, and lots of cities over 10 million people. So it's phenomenal, this trend that's just occurred in the last several decades and is going to continue into the future. The economic growth of the world is being increasingly driven by the developing economies. So the developed economies are starting to plateau and level off a bit, being stagnant, as well as their population growth is not as great as the developing countries. And so the economic driving of the future is going to be carried or driven by these developing economies. There's an increasing demand for energy. People become more affluent as industries build in developing countries. People are buying energy consumptions, whether it's TVs or cars or um, larger houses with more electricity use, and more industrialization happening, that demand for energy. So that is a given in the future. We can argue whether that should be green electrons or brown electrons, but the demand is growing. Increasingly, there's a connectivity of people, digital, what I'm doing right now with people around the world. A decade ago was probably thought impossible. And now we're doing that all the time. We have these smartphones, which are for many people almost a life support system. We also are being more physically connected through, well, used to be up until this year, but it's still there, and it will resume in terms of air travel and nodes and hubs, and it's just much easier for everybody to get around the world and countries and meet with people. Transition in the globe is moving from a unipolar to what we call a polynodal world. So it used to be sort of one dominant economy or country in the world that was sort of the guiding light, if I can use that term. And now we're seeing these nodes of influence, regional nodes of influence around the world. So it could be Asia, it could be Europe, it could be the Americas. So we're seeing this polynodal world that is developing and will be developing further. A few comments about COVID, the ultimate disruptor, if I can use that term. COVID didn't stop these macro drivers that I talked about, but it changes how we look at them. We look at the climate change, and could that increase the risk of pandemics? Are companies pandemically prepared? I was surprised at the number of sort of health agencies that didn't have a pandemic plan. I was impressed with talking to industry people or industry leaders that already had pandemic plans in place before the pandemic appeared. So again, the private sector kind of maybe moving ahead of the governments in this case. The increased population of these large cities have facilitated the disease spread, and we've seen instances of that around the world. The economic impact of this is unevenly distributed. The wealthier economies have sort of aid programs for businesses, for individuals. The poor countries don't. So we're going to have this sort of uneven impact of the COVID disruption that will probably remain for a few years before we recover from that. Technology has saved us, if I can use that term, but technology has seen big booms in terms of training and online and communications and data systems and all of that. So we're recognizing this as sort of a necessity, this physical connectivity. The weaknesses of multilateral governance is sort of showing in terms of how we handle the outbreaks of diseases, how we're handling vaccines and sharing of vaccines or knowledge. So we're seeing sort of these regional powers becoming more increasingly influenced because the breakdown of this multilateral governance across the world. Some of these disruptions are going to be good and long-lasting, such as these technological ones. I kind of chuckle at the policy that is being broken down by this disruption. So countries that would normally take a year or two to develop an economic aid program now are doing that in a matter of minutes or days, type of thing. The process for getting medicines approved is being short-circuited. And at the end of the day, the governments are probably looking at this and saying, well, this works. Maybe we should keep doing this. So again, I think we're learning lots from that. You all like me, want to learn more. I've been giving you sort of a smattering of issues, opportunities around there. And I guess I would encourage everybody to come to the World Congress for what I call the rest of the story. Hopefully this has twigged a few of you with ideas of opportunities to present at the World Congress. So I hope to see abstracts coming in, presentations about the opportunities of some of the things that I've mentioned. So just a plug to keep in mind, don't stop thinking after the webinar, develop it further and come on. I'd like to just end up with a summary of a few points. And again, the CA policy that we've had. Is this development by accident or as needed? It was sort of a learning process the last couple of decades. We had this mindset and capacity hurdles or barriers that we've been overcoming and need to continue to overcome if we want CA to mainstream around the world. The access and the tenure are more farmer and government issue that needs to be developed, so a little more specific, but again, is important, both for CA and a number of other things. The systems, long-term thinking and experimentation is kind of almost contrary to what the trend is towards single factor, short-term type of research. There's no way of getting around this. We just need to educate people and think of innovative ways of making this happen. There's a mixture of policies that are out there. In the policy world, called policy mixes or stacking policies. We have to recognize that. We have to recognize that CA mainstreaming, some of our best allies may be in other sectors, such as transportation or health or those types of things that we can, or environment, that we can show how we strengthen their policies. Keep in mind public-private benefits framework and which part of the quadrants you might be working on if you're working in a project or initiatives. Conventions create these expectations, and I think there's opportunities for us there. We need to move into that space. We can't wait for others to come to us. I realize that's a difficult ask for a lot of people, since agriculture is a smaller economy or sector compared to some of these others, but that's the reality. Is there ways we can do that effectively? The trends I mentioned, the COVID I mentioned there, is these disruptions going to be forever? Are we going to learn from lessons? Is there going to be what industry calls pivoting into new ways of doing things and new policy learnings and options for policies and institutions? I think there is. So encourage everybody to come to the World Congress, come armed with materials that you can present and learn from others. So whether it's virtual or in place, we are adapting and we're resilient, and it will be fun. Thank you very much. Back to you, Gottlieb.
Thanks so much, Tom, for this very, very deep insight into the mechanisms on how to promote and mainstream CA. I think you provided a huge menu of how to mainstream CA and what are the global, regional, national, and even local drivers for adoption and sometimes disadoption. Thanks a lot for this. Well, we do have a few questions already in the question and answer box. I may first ask you, well, there was a question regarding the cost-benefit analysis. Are there analyses available regarding cost-benefit of CA adoption? Well, I guess yes, but I will leave the question to you to answer.
Yes, there is. I don't know that there is anything sort of large scale or global that I'm aware of. No sort of meta-analysis of things, and that there's the opportunity for that. I think you'll find most of the cost-benefit analysis will be done at local levels and specific conditions, specific groups of farmers, applications. So again, reach out to the farm organizations or researchers in your area, and they're probably aware of them.
Okay, thank you. There was another question regarding, well, you mentioned subsidies. Well, sometimes different countries, governments, whoever, they offer subsidies to promote CA. And it is well known that there are often subsidies for the purchase of CA equipment. Do you know of any example that that there are subsidies to for service provider if someone wants to hire the service for CA adoption or implementation?
I guess my short answer is no. I can't put my finger on specific to the service providers that I was speaking of in terms of a subsidy on it, but I have seen subsidies elsewhere on sort of services providers, consulting, where they would pay a portion of a consultant fee or all of the consultant fee for helping them to develop conservation plans for farms, nutrient management plans for farms, that sort of thing. The farm practice where there is, because again, there is that public benefit that is occurring from that. So the government realizes that there should be some incentive for that. It's also a way for governments to develop new methodologies and explore different approaches. So it's usually a wise investment for governments to try as these subsidization of that. The downside of that sometimes is if they're subsidizing these service providers, I've seen where service providers increase their rates to take account for that subsidy, so there's no net savings. So that there's ways of handling that, and so we have to be smart about it.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Another question here from Canada. Well, it is asking, on the basis of which criteria does the state support conservation agriculture? And is the support also directed to investments in equipment in Canada, or is it on a hectare basis?
How does the state support agriculture? I guess in Canada it's through multiple ways. Not sure that we are supporting CA specifically anymore because it has become quite, I guess, adoption level is quite high. Initially, I'm aware in parts of Canada, and Canada is a bunch of provinces that sort of operate independently, but also collectively. They did have machinery subsidies where a farmer could buy a no-till planter with a subsidy, with the proviso that he would also share that planter with a few of the neighboring farmers, which is actually a unique strategy because that farmer could then share knowledge and create a larger circle of influence and learning within the community with one piece of equipment. So it was quite useful. A lot of the tools used in mainstreaming CA in Canada is being through extension, and investment in extension is a viable policy tool for governments. So there's a lot of investment in the extension because they realized that they needed to look at the whole system. We needed to reach the farmers in the fields. So we did things. One of the things that happened with machinery is field days for side-by-side comparisons of machinery. So they brought the machinery manufacturers to one field in one day, and they ran the equipment beside each other parallel through the fields. The farmers could talk to the machinery. They could be digging in the field behind to see what sort of job the planters were doing. And there's a lot of learning, a lot of communication, that sort of strengthening policy of getting together and sharing information happened from that. And again, through an extension investment.
Thanks. Another question regarding, well, even the COVID-19. Well, it says that in China, CA is featured by no-tillage and helped to simplify agricultural production. And thus it was highly encouraged during the COVID crisis in China. Do you know of any similar experience from other countries, that there was some specific, push, let's say, of CA promotion elsewhere apart from China?
Again, I would say no. In the COVID context, I'm not aware of any sort of push for CA production systems. There's been a number of farm issues, often related to farm labor, things like that. I think CA has the advantage often that they don't have a high labor requirement at short periods of time that maybe some of the other more intensive farming operations do. So they're a little more resilient that way. But I'm not aware of government promotion of CA as a mitigation strategy for COVID.
Okay. Well, to give you a short break, there's a question regarding, well, towards FAO. It asks whether FAO should work on setting up national consortia on conservation agriculture. Maybe Joseph, you would like to take this, or Fenton, or you are muted, Joseph. Sorry.
Yes, being from FAO, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organizations, it's not easy for us to deal with all national governments directly. So that is why we like to work with regional associations, for example, with ECAF, with the African Conservation Tillage Network, through which we then try to go into the continental or the sub-regional policies. And I think for Sub-Saharan Africa, I think we managed quite well to link mechanization and conservation agriculture by flagging the need for sustainably mechanizing, because it's such a hot topic. Very easily, mechanization programs can go completely in the wrong direction, being public sector driven instead of private sector organized, and having the totally inappropriate equipment that is not at all conducive to the objective of environmental sustainability. So we are working on that topic with governments. In my case, it's rather related to mechanization strategies, and they are conducted at national level. They have to be at national level because it's about national policies. And that is where we try to link mechanization and the environmental sustainability with each other, beside economic and social aspects. So I think we're getting there.
Okay. Well, this is actually in the same direction of another question that popped up right here. Now I lost it somewhere. I'm sorry. It's not sequentially the question answers. Well, someone was asking, whether the public policies are encouraging the mechanization towards CA. And I would personally say that, as you mentioned just now, Joseph, that this is an issue for national governments. I think to address this globally is actually not possible, because it's a very, very national oriented issue to support investments and in machinery and in CA machinery, actually. So I think this question is answered like that. There was another issue regarding IPCC. You mentioned, Tom, that conversations with IPCC about soil carbon. Do you think there is enough general awareness of soil carbon, or do we still have more to do to educate policymakers that carbon storage is more than just planting trees?
I would say there's a lot more to do. Maybe I could say policymakers are slow learners, but I don't think that's the case. I think actually in IPCC, I think we're seeing a generation turnover. So the people that were there 2 decades ago learning about soil carbon have now maybe retired and become CA farmers, I hope. But there's a new generation there that don't have the opportunity to attend those lectures that have long since passed. So I think education is a continuous need in the IPCC, because it's such a large group of people that are coming and going. You have new people coming in that have no awareness, no knowledge of what agriculture is, what conservation agriculture is, what sustainable practices are, what carbon is, what soil carbon looks like, how we measure a ton of CO2, all of those. So I think we really need to be doing a lot of education in that area in order to enable them to be smart. They don't need to know the details, but they need to know carbon, and again, how it's connected across things. It seems to be a resurgence of interest in soil carbon. I mean, just lately I've had several requests for things looking at carbon, at source books on carbon, at even a conference paper I presented on the Alberta carbon offset system years ago. I've noticed the last month or so the readership on that has climbed quite dramatically. Don't know why or where. I haven't investigated it, but I think that, to me, that signals that there's more interest globally in carbon, and we need to get out there and educate people.
Yeah, well, I think this the other question goes in the same direction, which is how to get into policymakers that are surrounded by CA adverse lobbies, with an environment of ignorant scientists that also do not help farmers to discover and develop CA, which is the case in many countries. Well, the question actually is how to get into policymakers, but well, just said they are slow learning, but how to speed this up?
And I think the policymakers and the policy decision people, policy advisors, need to have things boiled down to the essence. So they need the short story version of these type of things, and very often scientists will come in and lay their scientific papers on their desk and say, read my paper on such and such. It's wonderful, and all of its detailed graphics. That doesn't help. So we need the policymakers, as part of their job function, is to synthesize across scales and disciplines and sectors. So we need to present the CA information to them in a useful form. A lot of these policy briefs that you see people developing, where are the policy briefs on CA? They need to be coming from the CA organizations, also from the research organizations. The CA researchers out there, I would say, should be forced to develop CA policy documents as well as the research papers. Maybe a one-for-one. You're not allowed to publish a paper until you can present a policy brief, maybe a one-page policy brief on that.
Okay, thanks a lot, Tom. Well, so what else do we have here in this list? Well, with the environmental social governance becoming more prominent, especially to the social component in the light of COVID and food security, how do we value the public good that is being provided by CA? You mentioned earlier, and who and how is it paid for?
Good question. That's, I think, the issue of the decade that we're probably dealing with. A lot of the corporate world now is moving into this environmental social governance consciousness reporting. So it's not all about profit and loss. And they do, like I say, the World Economic Forum came out with a metric system of 22 measures for the principles: planet, people, prosperity. So how are we helping them? They're already moving in that area. They said we can't wait for government to do that. I don't know how that payment will be developed down to the farm level, but one of the areas is, first you got to measure it and acknowledge it before you can truly value it and have compensation. So I think we need to push to measure this. CA farmers, primary producers, need to be engaged along that whole supply chain, the value chain. Agriculture has been often criticized for not having nice, tight communications along that supply chain. So we need to go from the field to the consumer, through the retailers to the processors. How do we have that ESG continuance across there? There is ways now, in terms of technology, data handling systems that we have, could be there for a benefit, but we need to quantify that and then decide, how do we pay for it? Can government put a taxation, like a green tax or a food tax or recycling taxes, circular economy tariffs on foods or food processors? So I think that all needs to be looked at. And how do farmers derive the benefits of this? Historically, the public is known as the free riders, the people that ride along for free of the public benefits generated by landowners or land managers. And I'm excited. I think this next decade, we're going to see some movements in that area.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Another question here is, I'm still not clear about the role of private fertilizer and chemical companies as rivals or supporting entities to promote CA.
I think they can be both. I would like to look at them as supporters or synergisms. You see the fertilizer industry now is promoting the 4R system of sort of responsible nutrient management. They are being criticized for environmental pollution. We've reached the global limits and nitrogen and phosphorus. So they're starting to rethink. They're pushing from their side. And I've talked to them and said, like, farmers don't want to spend more than they need to on this. Can we manage this responsibly? So they're developing some technologies, some approaches on that. I think the herbicide people are maybe a little slower to respond that way. They don't seem to have a good strategy in terms of handling pesticides. There's been these IPM, integrated pest management stuff, but it's more generated from the research sectors than the private sector. But they all have to acknowledge that we need to be using things responsibly. CA has a philosophy of minimizing the use for that. The farmers are wanting that. So I think, again, it's a case of opening the dialogue, having that conversation with those companies, and finding out where we can work together or have that happy middle ground.
Excellent. Well, there's still another question here. How is it possible to sustainably manage possible pest buildup in CA practices, considering environmental impact of using pesticides? Well, I would take this personally. I would say, well, there's no other means than diversify your cropping system in order to avoid this, and also to avoid the need for external inputs in terms of pesticides. So this is one thing. Another, well, this is more a comment than a question. This is from Bolivia. Well, there was a point that actually COVID brought up the issue of long supply chains. And therefore local farmer-based food production, as opposed to large-scale agro-businesses, monocropping or livestock production, could help also and be a promoter of CA regionally. Okay, well, we are already out of time, and I would, well, I personally still do have a question to you, Tom, which is, with regard to consumers and citizens, how do we, and we in Europe are especially, we do have a problem with that. How do we engage consumers and citizens as a whole in the to embrace CA? Because, well, we all know about the issue of well, the environmentalist movements and the greening attempts, and that CA is not everywhere seen as well a positive system with regard to the greening measures that are proposed and the organic farming. But we actually would need to engage consumers and citizens to push policymakers to do more for CA and to embrace also CA. So there has to be a push both from not only from the academia, it has to come from the consumer. And how do we actually get the word and the support of the consumers and citizens regarding CA? Do you have any idea how to, well, to create this pressure from the consumers and from the citizens to make politicians and decision makers support CA much more than they do at the moment?
complex question, multifacets, and my answer would have to be similarly sort of multifaceted. As I mentioned earlier, the researchers, the scientists, people have to provide information in a consumable format to the policymakers. So I think, you know, there has to be a whole initiative that way. And maybe there has been some initiatives out there, and they've been good, but whatever has been, it's not enough because it's not reaching enough people everywhere. So that needs to be worked on. We also need to look at the narrative. So when you're dealing with the public, there's a whole sort of social science now on how to build a narrative. And there's some principles in it. One is that you don't argue with them. You say, yes, I have a concern of pesticide use or fertilizer use as well. And I tell people that when I'm speaking to the public, I said, I know of no farmer that says, I just want to get out there and roll in my pesticides or apply more and not wear any safety equipment or things like that. So they don't like applying it. It is one of their highest costs. The two highest costs for farmers are the inputs of pesticides and, let's say, fertilizers or the chemical inputs. So they want to reduce that as much as possible because, again, of the private benefit issue. So you know, you explain that to people, and then you say, okay, so now how do we work, you know, towards that? One way is CA and developing the science, and you as a consumer need to be looking for that in the grocery stores or things like that. It's not an all or none type of thing, because then we would maybe take all of your vehicles away. So we don't want to remove you from your vehicle, but you're encouraged to use your vehicle less and less and use public transportation is more. So I mean, it's you know, find an analogy with the public that they can relate to that would be analogous to farmers adopting CA. Don't just, you know, show it all from the farmer point of view, put it in their personal framework. So again, very quickly, there's a few of those. I think now with the technology that we have through internet, through Twitter, through Zoom, through YouTubes, all those sort of things, the sort of extension possibilities is just expanding, and we have to learn how to use that.
Thanks, Tom. I know it's a difficult question to answer, and well, I think you are right. We have to create the correct and an accepted narrative towards CA to convince consumers that there are different things, but just stopping, accepting the progress we made over decades and so on. And with this, I would like to close this session, but of course not before giving the word to the colleagues from FAO to say still some words, and to thank all of you for the attendance, and to thank all of you for the questions. I'm sorry if there were some questions that could not be addressed within this space of questions and answers. But I want to thank you very much for your attendance and your interest in this webinar, and hope to welcome you again to the next one in 2 weeks. So I pass now the word to Joseph to still say some words on behalf of FAO.
Thanks, Gottlieb, and thanks all attendants, all participants. Thanks a lot to Tom Goddard. It was really good to hear and to listen and to look at your slides. You managed to, you know, sometimes we're losing the oversight, and you managed to get things a little bit organized, the big conventions, the SDGs, and all the CBD that we have, and where is CA? And I was very glad to hear that you said even CBD, they realize they need agriculture. They cannot fence everything off. And yeah, and with CA, I mean, I think what I took from your presentation again is that what is happening there, we are getting concrete. And that's also both our advantage, but also our day-to-day struggle with our colleagues and friends. For example, when it comes to equipment, I mean, CA means let's try not using the plow. And instead, that also means that service provider we were talking about shouldn't have that plow and that disc in his compound, but instead the direct seeder and maybe the subsoiler, and of course a sprayer that is cleaned and that is calibrated and that works well with each nozzle perfect for accurate application of as little as possible input, like in this case maybe the herbicide. So it all comes down to fairly concrete stuff. And also often in these big conventions, we talk always at a rather global level and a little bit abstract. But for farmers, their life and their work is not abstract. They have that problem every day. And and I want to respond to one question about the pesticide issues in the soils. If we are improving the soil health, as we all know, and the soil organic matter, we will have less leaching. So the no-till direct seeding will help to remove that problem rather than create that problem of leaching of pesticides into the groundwater table. So that's just on the technical side. I liked your summary about mindset, capacity, access, and land tenure issues. I was glad you mentioned the service providers and all what I said just now. FAO is about policies, and sometimes it's sad to see that good old FAO is here since 75 years, as we are celebrating our anniversary this year. And if there is a new problem coming up, the community normally likes to create something new, like for example, UN Convention to Combat Desertification, or another CBD, or another big body, while FAO is still around, and we are still working on the same problems that when FAO started, resolving hunger, sustainable agriculture, sustainable intensification, and soil health and soil issues. So it's good to have all these organizations, but we also sometimes should think what was already in place. And FAO is there to work on these issues with all our partners, for example, with ECAF and with conservation agriculture. So in a way, we are pleased to host be part of this community. We are hosting the website for the global community on conservation agriculture. And in this regard, I want to close myself. I have to thank Van Beet, our team leader, who is leading the team that is having the conservation agriculture knowledge. I'm also thanking Hafiz, who is on this webinar, but he's on leave. So I want him to enjoy his leave also. And so with that, I think I finish here. And thanks and greetings to everybody. I look forward to the next event in 2 weeks.
Okay. Thanks to all of you, especially Tom, for your very, very excellent presentation, and which gives us a lot of food for thought and how to mainstream and to apply your ideas and examples you gave on local and regional and national level. Thanks a lot again. Okay. Bye-bye to all, and see you again in 2 weeks' time. Thanks a lot to all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone. Take care.